They say that there are no atheists in a foxhole. And at least any military chaplain can tell you that Jesus had told his disciples, "Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves." As recorded in the Synoptic Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10, verse 16. "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places," as the Apostle Paul writes to the church at Ephesus, chapter 6, verse 12. And at least Paul appears to describe an intersection between church and state, giving unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and giving unto God that which is God's, notwithstanding. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, of record a son and grandson of Protestant clergymen, a graduate of Jesuit high school, and post a global public health crisis. I enjoy the distinction of bringing a total of 3 cases all the way to the United States Supreme Court, specifically on the issue of defending encroachments against religious liberties guaranteed under the Constitution's First Amendment, under the Establishment and Free Exercise Clauses. But many in the faith community, even those who are in leadership, do not appear to acknowledge an active and organized adversary force that has demonstrated a firm resolve to align against them and oppose them. And perhaps as a person of faith, you too may agree. But when you are unaware, your adversary is at his best advantage. And in a former life, I had served as a tactical and strategic intelligence analyst with a responsibility in an echelon above core operations cell or in a tactical operations center to observe events and trends occurring in a given battle space or area of operations. So for the next few moments, assuming that all leaders are familiar with their mission statement, we can dispense with a restatement of the mission. But much like in an operations order or warning order, let's begin with a situation update regarding enemy forces, strength, and disposition to develop a bit of situational awareness, much as had probably occurred in China upon the identification of only 27 cases of a pneumonia of unknown etiology, with not yet even one fatality in the central mainland of China in December 2019, but which, with less than 41 known cases by mid-January 2021, had set off an alarm that had traveled all around the world and had everyone frightened. And pandemics are historically associated with fear, confusion, and despair, which tends to affect judgment. Before the pandemic, faith affiliation across the nation had experienced a sharp decline by 12%. And in the 2 years of public health crisis, it had experienced an additional 6 percentage point loss, as those who identify themselves as nuns, an amalgamation of atheists, agnostics, and other secularists, joining together under one common nomenclature, appearing large, had increased by 6 points to 29% of Americans, increasing their margin over the largest faith denomination, the Roman Catholic Church, which had been the largest faith denomination according to the Pew Research Center. The Supreme Court has heard oral arguments on a case involving a football coach in Bremerton, Washington, who had lost his job because he had decided to kneel in prayer on the 50-yard line at the end of each high school football game recently, when it had been brought to the attention of public school authorities that some of the students had decided to join him in prayer. During the midterm elections, with the Dobbs case decision on abortion expected to be overturned by the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court is expected to overturn Roe v. Wade, an issue in which many progressive and secular interests have been placed at odds, divided against conservative Christians, and some other Christians dividing in a classic pattern of divide and conquer, which goes back even before Caesar. The incumbent in Virginia's 8th Congressional District has, during the past year, decided to align himself with the League of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Freedom from Religion Foundation. After 2 years of a public health response in which even the nation's only physician serving as a state governor has reluctantly acknowledged that he had exceeded his authority when imposing restrictions on places of worship. Little military knowledge. According to Sun Tsu, all warfare is based on deception. You have faced an invisible enemy. While at least Christians were sent as sheep amongst wolves. And Sun Tzu advised, therefore, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. Hold out baits to entice the enemy. Feign disorder and crush him. If he is secure at all points, be prepared for him. If he is in superior strength, evade him. If your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate him. Pretend to be weak, that he may grow arrogant. If he is taking his ease, give him no rest. If his forces are united, separate them. Attack him where he is unprepared. Appear where you are not expected. These military devices leading to victory must not be divulged beforehand. Now, the general who wins a battle makes many calculations in his temple ere the battle is fought. The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand. Thus do many calculations lead to victory, and few calculations to defeat. How much more no calculation at all? It is by attention to this point that I can foresee who is likely to win or lose. That was Sun Tzu. And in the military intelligence schoolhouse at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, young lieutenants will spend a great deal of time attempting to become familiar with enemy doctrine that presents a threat, the easiest of which are those official pronouncements and indications that have been expressed publicly in the open source by the adversary. And certainly the motto of not afraid to burn in hell at the Freedom from Religion Foundation presents at least indicia of an opposition to religion in a zero-sum winner-take-all game. And if that is your adversary, Sun Tzu advises that the general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand. Have you made your provisions for the hereafter? Have you made your decision for Christ? Well, by August 2020, it has been reported by the Barna Group and published in Christianity Today that 1 in 500 churches had not made their provisions for the hereafter a pandemic and had already permanently closed their doors, never to reopen again. Just as sound asleep, as Jesus said, found his disciples in the garden 3 times before Judas had returned to betray him to the local authorities. Do I have your attention? I know that you are interested. Have you made your decision for Christ? Action. According to the Freedom from Religion Foundation, this nation has a secular constitution that they defend. And many who share this agenda most often quote from a letter from Thomas Jefferson upon his inauguration in 1801 to the Danbury, Connecticut Baptist Convention, in which he had used the phrase, a wall of separation between church and state. A phrase often repeated by many academics, but not necessarily generally understood. And so, for the remainder of this instructional briefing, we are just going to attempt to provide a clearer understanding of what appears to be a relatively simple phrase. In an analysis that may be familiar to those who may have studied the works of Shakespeare or other classical works in high school, or exegesis in seminary, often annotated with multiple footnotes to provide the proper contextual framework within which a certain phrase was made, and which would have been more genuinely familiar sometimes to contemporaneous audiences than perhaps more modern ones. Certainly in your own vocabulary, when speaking with those outside your generation or culture, there were some things that others simply would not immediately understand because of certain idioms, unique communal experiences, and what have you. Essentially, the issue of separation doctrine is a legal argument. And while quoting a sentence from any famous person in even high school debate may impress many people because it appears that you have come prepared and engaged in some due diligence preparation, but also you may be aware that many less educated persons, unfamiliar with logical arguments, are vulnerable to that which are described as logical fallacies, one of which is the logical fallacy of authority, wherein a clever debater may attempt to take a shortcut by attempting to use mere form to subordinate substance, essentially baffling the audience with BS, being unable to dazzle them with brilliance. And it happens probably far more often than most think. Let's take a look at your celebrity endorsements. Generally, as students in the very first year of law school are instructed, where there is a statutory provision under review, a court will, under the rules of statutory construction, prefer to apply the plain word meaning of words and phrases. But where ambiguity arises in a legal controversy, such a letter from one of the founders might provide some legislative history to assist the court in clarifying the meaning so as to develop a rule to decide a particular case, as was the case in 1878 when Chief Justice Waite, writing for the majority of the Supreme Court in U.S. v. Reynolds, a case about polygamy that arose in the territory, still a territory, of Utah, had prompted litigation. And the court explained this phrase by quoting the portion of the 1801 letter from which it finds its origin. Context. Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of the government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that the legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Here, Thomas Jefferson does not appear to be telling the Danbury Baptist Convention that he wishes to be free of them, but rather grants that their faith and worship were a personal choice beyond the reach of government action, and in this way, building a wall of separation between church and state by the plain meaning suggests a one-way prescription. But Jefferson goes on to clarify his position by stating, adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore man to all his natural rights, convinced he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. Essentially, leaving matters of conscience to the individual and the churches, which is not often what we see in schools or in other political debate regarding religion. And as many recall from the decision penned by Chief Justice Marshall in Marbury v. Madison in 1803 during the Jefferson administration, it is the emphatic duty and province of the Judicial Department to say what the law is. And in U.S.B. Reynolds, Chief Justice Waite explained this passage from Thomas Jefferson. Coming as this does from an acknowledged leader of the advocates of the measure, it may be accepted almost as an authoritative declaration of the scope and effect of the amendment thus secured. Congress was deprived of all legislative power over mere opinion, but was left free to reach actions which were in violation of social duties or subversive of good order. In other words, the government, in his view, could not dictate what opinions a person might have in conscience, might hold or reject, and could only legislate measures to correct conduct that was subversive, in violation of criminal law or in violation of essentially civil law. And again, this interpretation defines a limit for government action and not the actions of church and faith leaders, so long as they do not break the criminal or civil law. Many who are not familiar with jurisprudence, like an attorney might be, and not familiar with constitutional law, which sometimes we must go to constitutional law professors and those who actually practice constitutional law, because this is something that is a very special practice, may not be aware that the First Amendment and most of the provisions in the Bill of Rights, when written, only pertain to the federal government and not the separate and several states. And it was not until the adoption of the 14th Amendment in 1868 that these liberties were extended to the application under the laws of the state governments. And it was not until 1947, in the case of Everson v. Board of Education, coming before the Supreme Court, involving a New Jersey statute that had permitted a municipality to reimburse transportation expenses of school-aged children, when the wall of separation was revisited in the majority opinion written by Justice Black. And this was an important case to illustrate the point, because speaking for the majority, he stated, measured by these standards, we cannot say that the First Amendment prohibits New Jersey from spending tax-raised funds to pay the bus fares of parochial school pupils as a part of a general program under which it pays the fares of pupils attending public and other schools. It is undoubtedly true that children are helped to get to church schools. There is even a possibility that some of the children might not be sent to church schools if the parents were compelled to pay their children's bus fares out of their own pockets, when transportation to a public school would have been paid for by the state. The same possibility exists where the state requires a local transit company to provide reduced fares to school children, including those attending parochial schools, or where a municipally owned transportation system undertakes to carry all school children free of charge. And Justice Black, speaking for the majority, held or concluded the First Amendment has erected a wall between church and state. That wall must be kept high and impregnable. We could not approve the slightest breach, but New Jersey has not breached it here. And again, this presents an interpretation not of a secular government as endorsed by the Freedom from Religion Foundation, but rather a neutral government and constitution. Yet, in the beginning, it was written that the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And the Lord said to his disciples that he had sent them as sheep amongst wolves, and advised them therefore to be as wise as the serpent. This briefing is unclassified, as you were. My name is Major Mike Webb. By God, I am running for U.S. Congress. This year, resolved to do the right thing, and we shall make America great again. Honest. Carry on.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
Sinner, do you love your Jesus? Sinner.